Remember last week when I said that that video was the most difficult video I'd ever done? Yeah, well, I was an idiot then. This one was way harder, or dare I say, impossible. I wanted this video to cover all of the remaining Batman films in the last 2 decades, but there were too many. So instead, I decided to dedicate this video to the Nolan Trilogy and Catwoman, while covering the DC Universe films, Joker, and the brand new The Batman movie starring Robert Pattinson next week. But this week, as I mentioned, we're covering one of the most critically acclaimed superhero trilogies of all time. Movies that possess highs way higher than anything I covered last week, and it also has Catwoman, which is a poison to my eyes, ears, and mind, the likes of which I won't soon recover from. But hey, variety's the spice of life, right? So let's quit wasting time and dive straight into our first review, and the very first time I've ever seen 2004's utter commercial and critical disaster, Catwoman.
No! God, please, no! 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 No!
Catwoman. One movie into this mammoth of a video and I already have a headache. Let it be known that had this film not been part of this massive video project, I would have stopped watching at about the 13-minute mark when this reptile was talking down to this girl. And yes, the dialogue is on the nose and cringe, but I would have stopped not just because of that, but because this film is so damn boring. The setting isn't remotely interesting, and the first 4 minutes of the film just tell us about the history of Catwoman with flashing images. The idea that there's only 1 year of separation between this monstrosity and the Christopher Nolan trilogy is kind of wild when you think about it. I mean, it's kind of like 1 year before the release of Dragon Ball Super Broly, you might have had Dragon Ball Evolution. And that is all to say that this Catwoman film did not do well, racking up an impressively bad 9% on Rotten Tomatoes and absolutely tanking in the box office. Catwoman stands proudly as the single biggest critical and commercial failure I'll be covering in all of these videos. So I hope you're having fun with my misery. This dumpster fire tells the story, and I'm using those words loosely, of Selina Kyle's Catwoman. And that was a lie. I told you a lie just now. This isn't Selina Kyle's story, but that of another Catwoman, I guess, called Patience Phillips. I think they might have struggled to get the rights to the character or something. Unlike Selina Kyle's tale, this isn't a story about liberation or freedom from the shackles of society's expectations, but instead it's a film that revels in them. Paired with that are some of the most bizarre choices in terms of filmmaking. The CG has aged horrendously, and that damn basketball scene has taken years off my lifespan. To try to string together a coherent thought concerning this film is an exercise in insanity. And I mean that. The story is about a woman who inherits the ancient Egyptian power of the Catwoman, dresses in the minimum amount of clothing as a PG-13 film would allow, and succeeds in overthrowing a corrupt beauty industry exec, all the while wooing her object of desire, Mr. Man over here. The final battle is really lame, and let me emphasize just how lame it is by showing you how the villain dies. They battle, she lands some attacks on her face, she looks at her face in a reflection, and oh no, I'm not pretty anymore. Oops, I let go and now I'm falling to my death. And okay, look, my biggest issue with this film isn't that it's entirely vapid and insulting to the Catwoman character, it's actually a little more specific than that. Her agency, power, and freedom are all derived from her hypersexualization, leaving the core character in this film bereft of any sense of identity. To bolster this point, here's a direct quote from the costume designer of this film, Angus Strathy. He said, "We wanted a very reality-based wardrobe to show the progression from demure, repressed patience to the sensual awakening of a sexy warrior goddess." That is a real quote from a real person that worked on this movie.
What a perfect idea.
And if we want to talk about quotes tied to this film, in 2018, John Rogers, credited as the third writer in this film, which meant he was probably brought into the project late in the scripting process, had this to say on Twitter regarding the film. Quote, "Full disclosure, I was fired off of this movie after writing the green light draft because I kept arguing with notes that'd make the movie very bad, which I said out loud at meetings. Pitoff, the director, had an eye for action, but nobody in power knew what movie they wanted. At one point I said, you do realize the big third act fight in your summer tentpole is Halle Berry dressed like a Quebecois stripper beating the shit out of a makeup exec in a pantsuit. I mean, you know you have a bad movie when it's a burn when someone describes exactly what the third act of your film is. And I mean, he's not wrong. From a comic accuracy point of view, even the Wikipedia page of the film felt it necessary to have this as its first line. Catwoman is a 2004 American superhero film loosely based on the DC Comics character Catwoman, to the point of it being in name only and has nothing to do with the Batman franchise. This reads like someone in DC made sure that there was a disclaimer at the beginning of this Wikipedia entry. So yeah, yikes. And do you know what the craziest part of all of this is? Out of all of the absurd decisions made in this fever dream of a feature, I learned that Halle Berry made $14 million playing Catwoman here. To put that into perspective, Tobey Maguire was paid $4 million for Spider-Man 1, a much better film. Tom Holland was paid $10 million for Spider-Man No Way Home, a much better film. And Andrew Garfield was paid $1.5 million for both the amazing Spider-Man 1 and 2 combined. Which, let me remind you, are both infinitely better films than whatever this was. I've no idea what Hollywood was doing back in those days with their money, but damn. Those are my thoughts on this garbage fire of a film. This was a painful 1 out of 10 I would not recommend to anyone. And now, it's time for something completely different. It's time for the Christopher Nolan trilogy, starting where it all began. Batman Begins 2005.
There's nothing to fear but fear itself.
I am writing this review of Batman Begins mere moments after having just finished watching the film, and I cannot believe just how much it blew me away. Seriously, this movie fascinated me, reinvigorated me, and brought me to tears, perfectly capturing everything I've learned to appreciate and love about the Batman mythos over the last month through the comics, exploring how he came to be, what he represents, and why he trudges forward, why he struggles, and why when he falls, he will always pick himself right back up. The film itself, from what I've noticed, takes inspiration from a number of brilliant Batman comics. The first is perhaps the most obvious, with 1987's Batman Year One. The second being Batman The Long Halloween, released between 1996 and 1997. And finally, the third, a very short comic called The Man Who Falls, written by Dennis O'Neil and illustrated by Dick Giordano in 1989. And despite being just 16 pages in length, this one still managed to say enough to make an impact on me as a reader, having it quickly become one of my favorite Batman comics to date, with its very title speaking to one of the most impactful lines in this film. The comic itself is a concentrated retelling of previously published Batman stories, and the similarities to the comic, particularly in certain key moments, is quite stark. And thankfully, that snappy pacing I loved in that comic is present in this film too. The introduction is remarkably quick at establishing the central and even secondary parts of the story to us. If you recall, I complimented the first Sam Raimi film for being extremely efficient with its time delivering exposition, but this film takes it to a whole new level, kicking things off in a setting we've not associated with Bruce Wayne or Batman for that matter in these films up until now. No shadows, no noir feel just yet, instead shrouded in bright colors in a warm country as Bruce hangs out in prison. While the concept and indeed some of the imagery from that comic I like is present in these opening sequences, I will say that there is a stark difference. Every time Bruce did something academic or ambitious in that comic, you could replace that with theft or petty larceny in this film. And to be honest, I think that works a whole lot better. It paints our hero as a lost soul wandering the wilderness of the world in search of meaning, in search of a way to right the traumas of his life, and he finds just that.
What are you seeking? I seek the means to fight injustice.
I remembered having conversations with others about this film, and indeed the third in the trilogy, after I mentioned I really liked The Dark Knight when I first saw it. And regarding this film in conversation, I always left with the impression that the Scarecrow, which we see later played by Cillian Murphy, was the main antagonist, similar to how the Joker is in the second. This could not have been further from the case. Ra's al Ghul is the central antagonist to Bruce Wayne and indeed Batman in this feature for one fundamental reason. He's the opposite of Batman, and by virtue of that fact, the opposing force to Batman's goals in this film. Let me explain. The film drip feeds us different parts of Bruce's backstory, from his falling down the well, his fear of bats manifesting, his young adult life struggling with revenge, his adventures throughout the world, his meeting with Ra's, and indeed his defection from the League of Shadows once he learns of their goals. Ra's discovers a young, troubled man full of rage with revenge in his heart. Bruce blamed himself for the death of his parents, and when the cops catch up to the person who killed them, they tell Bruce,
Good news. We got him, son.
This doesn't make him feel better. And throughout his life, he ends up harboring this potent resentment for both the system and the individual who killed his parents until his hearing trial, when Bruce is a young adult and perhaps at the lowest point in his life. Bruce sees his parents' killer's potential freeing as an injustice and is prepared to do something about it, despite this person's reforming and his want to do the right thing now. Thankfully, someone else steps in to do what Bruce wanted before he ended up making one of the biggest mistakes of his life. And upon reflecting on what just transpired, Bruce is almost thankful. And that's when we get one of the best quotes in the movie. Bruce says, "My parents deserved justice," to Rachel. She responds, "Well, you're not talking about justice, you're talking about revenge. Sometimes they're the same," he says. And she responds, "No, they're never the same, Bruce. Justice is about harmony. Revenge is about making yourself feel better." I love that line. Confused and distant, Bruce yearns to become the man he needs to be, and if he's to make a difference in the world, which fortunately or unfortunately leads him right to Roz and his training. And speaking of which, something I felt was lacking in the other films was a greater emphasis on fight scenes beyond simple punching and kicking. And while there was some variety in the better films back then, I felt like this was the film where Batman finally got to loosen up a bit and get down to business. Whether it be in the prison yard, during his ninja training under Roz, beating down the scum of Gotham, or even with his car, which looks insanely awesome in this, by the way, there's a greater emphasis on movement and choreography that wasn't as pronounced in the prior films, I noticed. To try and understand the character of Ra's al Ghul, I decided to hop into a comic from the 70s called Tales of the Demon, a comic by Dennis O'Neil again, wherein he began to reshape Batman in a serious, brooding story prior to his full reinvention in the 80s. Within this tale, I noticed a host of similarities between the comic and film adaptations of the character. While there's a noticeable difference in appearance from his hair to the absence of a bright green cloak, I did identify perhaps the best part of the character: his no-nonsense, no-tolerance, black-and-white approach to tackling moral dilemmas in a utilitarian fashion. Ra's represents exactly what Bruce wanted to be when he stood in that courtroom as a traumatized and angry young adult. Someone who was capable of exacting on a grand scale the revenge he saw as akin to justice. However, it's that coming-of-age change in Bruce Wayne and his moral code that stands in direct contrast with Ra's and indeed every criminal in this story. Ra's sees it as a moral imperative to take out the city of Gotham from the corrupt insides out, to start anew, whereas Bruce wants to protect them, to save them, to help guide them away from the destruction and vengeance he sought so dearly to get once upon a time. Batman Begins is a story about morality and justice in the truest sense of the word, and it's brilliant.
Why do you give a damn, Alfred? It's not your family.
Alfred is a brilliant character in this movie. And furthermore, I do believe that in this film, in an incredibly efficient manner, managed to capture exactly what I love about the character of Alfred. In lesser hands, a character with as few lines as this one possesses would have been left feeling meaningless or vapid to varying degrees. However, at every available opportunity, Alfred felt everything from competent to wise to warm in equal measure.
I give a damn, because a good man once made me responsible for what was most precious to him.
Batman as a character, more so perhaps than any other superhero out there in this genre, is given an identity based on how human he feels, how flawed he is, how flawed everything around him is, and why it's important to hold onto your humanity no matter what. Shrouded in the shadows of a gothic city surrounded by monsters lurking around every corner, Nolan saw it important to inject as much humanity into this story as one could. Tortured as Bruce Wayne is, he needs to have something worth fighting for. This is why I appreciated characters like Alfred, and indeed the rest of the secondary cast, feeling as human and warm as they did when given the chance. Rachel is a terrific rock in the story for Bruce whenever he wavers, offering Bruce and us as an audience a means with which to see Bruce's true self show. Lucius Fox, played by Morgan Freeman, is as warm as he is intelligent, offering up a plethora of gadgets to Bruce Wayne that anchor this story to its more realistic roots, while adding some much-needed variety and indeed humor to the film. There's a dry wit and rapport Bruce and he shares that's absolutely infectious. Furthermore, Jim Gordon has remained one of my favorite characters since reading the Year One material at the beginning of my journey back in January. I loved his fish-out-of-water perspective as he grapples with the morality-bereft circumstances Gotham is confronting him with on a daily basis. When I saw in this film that his partner was a corrupt cop called Floss, I kinda geeked out and said, hey, I know that guy, he's a dickhead. You know, I really enjoyed that Gordon got to play more of a role in this film too, by being one of the few good cops in the city, not in the pocket of a criminal underworld. And even when it comes to characters like Falcone or Scarecrow, there are efforts to humanize them where possible. And fun fact, Did you know that Cillian Murphy, who kills it playing the Scarecrow in this movie by the way, grew up in my hometown, like 10 minutes from where I live right now? He went to school with my cousin and by all accounts was a lovely, quiet boy. Ireland's most famous people aside though, something I did think was worth drawing attention to and showing appreciation for is this plotline with the Scarecrow and how his plan to poison the water supply of Gotham is lifted almost directly from the 2005 comic entitled The Man Who Laughs. Only instead of Joker, we have the Scarecrow carrying out the plan. But I digress. This film deals in such a balanced and measured fashion with the themes of doing the right thing no matter how difficult or harrowing it might be. To war against your inner demons and manage to come out the other end as the demon that strikes fear into the hearts of those that would dare do wrong to the innocent. To grow from the fearful child that once blamed himself for everything into the hero Gotham needs to shoulder the responsibilities and protection of everyone. Batman Begins, out of all the films I've covered so far, is by far and away the most faithful to the comics while delivering a compelling coming-of-age story exploring the themes of guilt, morality, and struggle. It's a beautiful love letter to the story I've grown to love and appreciate as of late, and furthermore, I think this is a movie that everyone should see once, and I'm going to give it the highest rating so far with a strong 8.5 out of 10. I adored this film. Exceptional from its snappy opening all the way to an ending, which teases a character and performance that ended up defining a generation of fans. And it all starts with one of the most beloved and iconic superhero flicks of all time.
I believe whatever doesn't kill you simply makes you stranger.
I am of course talking about 2008's The Dark Knight.
Yeah, but first a quick word from our sponsor.
Thanks so much to Alien for sponsoring this video. It's been really cool to partner with a brand who knows this platform in and out. If you're not familiar with Alien clothing, they were created by fellow YouTuber Elvis the Alien back in 2017, and their product line is pretty much perfect for this channel. If you love anime, movies, games, or pretty much anything science fiction, then you're more than likely going to love what Alien has to offer. They have a huge number of awesome designs carefully curated from some fantastic artists all over the world, and there's a real sense of exclusivity to picking up their stuff as they don't do reprints, although they're constantly being updated with new designs. Once they're gone, they're gone. And what I really love about their products is that they're surprisingly competitively priced given their use of some of the fabric quality on the market. Their items are actually all printed and shipped from Canada, where they're a bit of a hit in the skate shop zoomies. So if you want to get yourself some awesome limited edition clothing, head over to alienclothing.com and use code NOTMARK to get 20% off with free shipping on orders over $100. The Dark Knight. For context, this is the only film out of the Nolan trilogy that I had seen prior to making this video. However, I haven't seen it in over 10 years, and watching it today, it's even better than I remembered. And I thought it was fucking great the first time too. As a video essayist, I do try to make an effort to offer a different perspective when I review a story where possible. However, it's incredibly difficult to say anything about this movie that hasn't already been said numerous times over and over. And so, instead of agonizing and focusing on my saying of something unique or insightful pertaining to this film, I am going to instead share my personal experiences with this, and if something unique comes out, then great.
And here we go.
If you haven't watched this movie yet and are only heard about it, let me tell you that everything you've heard about it is either correct or not hyped up enough. Across the board, each and every actor is on their A game, delivering career-defining performances, with the crown jewel of said performances being that of the late Heath Ledger's unhinged and unsettlingly faithful interpretation of the Joker. Introduced to us in the first scene of the film as a series of unnamed and faceless masked clowns robbing a bank, we learn how meticulous, untrusting, and chaotic this individual can be. One thing, however, that I will say is that compared to the first film, which had a lot to unpack and stayed massively faithful to the source material in the comics, this one is noticeably more simple in terms of moving parts and plot while still taking aspects from the comics and contorting them into a brilliant narrative. However, that is not to say that this isn't a faithful adaptation either. While there isn't a singular source drawn from in particular for the purposes of this film's plot, plenty of scenes are taken from or take inspiration from numerous separate sources. Act 1. If the first film detailed a comprehensive origin story for Bruce Wayne as well as outlined his becoming of the Batman, then this is the film that deals with the ramifications of that reality. It's fascinating and exactly what Ra's al Ghul was looking to avoid the complications of in his blanket reset of Gotham in the first place. So in a way, I love that this film is a direct result of Bruce's choice in the first outing. Having become a symbol for the city, one that strikes fear into the hearts of the criminal underworld and hope for the citizens of the city. Batman has inspired a series of copycats which led to some funny and terrifying moments, but more important to the story is the character of Harvey Dent, Gotham's quote, White Knight. And part of what makes this film work so well is how much we grow to love and respect Harvey as a character right from the get-go. The first interaction with him on screen is intimate, with him sharing a bit about his family's history, followed soon after by one of the most badass moments in the film when a failed assassination attempt on his life doesn't spook him, but instead encourages him to assertively punch the guy's lights out, dismantling his gun before saying,
"If you want to kill a public servant, Mr. Maroney, I recommend you buy American."
That's badass. Remember, I hadn't seen this film in over 10 years, and to be honest, I completely forgot about Harvey Dent. And he turns out to be one of the best characters in this movie, if not one of the most thematically resonant.
You either die a hero, or you live long enough to see yourself become the villain.
What I love about this short dinner scene isn't just Dent doing what he does best, winning my heart, but it's the expression Bruce gives as he listens to Harvey and realizes that he's in fact one of the only genuinely good people in Gotham that has the will to make what he envisions a reality, spawning the phrase echoed throughout this film, "I believe in Harvey Dent." A quote lifted directly from a wonderful Batman comic called The Long Halloween. In fact, the scene where Gordon, Harvey, and Batman gather atop a roof could also be lifted from that comic too. Though I will say that compared to that comic, the character of Harvey Dent does come across in this film as far more virtuous and true, which is a brilliant change, I think. Harvey's ultimate downfall in this film is central to the themes of this story, and moreover, totally elevates this film's supremely brilliant villain.
I'm gonna make this pencil disappear. It's gone.
Act 2. Joker is the best part of this film. The performance from Heath Ledger is next level, and I will definitely be speaking on that in just a moment, but before I do, I'd also like to show my appreciation firstly for how well written this interpretation of the Joker's character is and how the narrative is built everything around him. While other characters in the first film, Batman Begins, were in service of Bruce Wayne, conveying the weakness and strengths of the character in his introductory outing, in The Dark Knight, unlike Ra's al Ghul and Scarecrow, Joker is central to the plot, with everything revolving around him, taking the symbol Batman has created for Gotham City to believe in as a challenge to show Batman and Gotham just how crazy the rest of the world really is when you remove that thin veil of civilization.
I'll show you. When the chips are down, these civilized people, they'll eat each other.
Something I noticed this time in this film that I hadn't seen before was how convicted Joker was in defending his person not being a, quote, freak, with numerous times he looks to Batman as a fellow crazy in the circus, which made me think back to the Killing Joke comic and the conversation between Batman and Joker in the end. However, there's something far more explicit that had me recall the Killing Joke in this particular film. The idea that Joker wants his origin or past to be, quote, multiple choice. I expressed in my review of Batman 1989 that while I loved Nicholson's performance as the Joker, I didn't like his backstory. It removed a lot of the mystique for me and humanized him a little too much. But in numerous instances in this film, Joker tells variations on a story he explains is the origin of his coming to be, but each and every time the story changes, adding an air of mystery to the character with him coming across as an ideology more so than an actual person.
He's a symbol. We don't have to be afraid of scum like you.
Yeah, you do, Brian.
Some men aren't looking for anything logical, like money. Some men just want to watch the world burn.
And that's what this film explores, with the Joker being the catalyst that makes it possible the characters of Harvey Dent and Bruce Wayne are pushed to their respective limits to see if their morals will stand up to the intense pressure of the Joker's antics. We've been slightly teased with Dent's composure when taking the law into his own hands to some extent, though still very dissimilar to The Long Halloween's comic, but when it comes to dealing with the Joker directly, Batman has a very different experience.
The good cop, bad cop routine?
Not exactly.
Joker's interrogation. This is the best scene in the movie. It's my favorite scene in the movie, and it was the very first scene filmed for this movie. As many of you know, films follow a 3-act structure, but like many great scenes, this too follows the 3-act structure and in effect acts as a microcosm of the entire film's conflict and struggle. Not a battle of brawn or cunning, although there is plenty of both, but instead a battle of ideology. In Robert McKee's book entitled Story, he speaks on the format of various scenes with particular emphasis on the more conversationally driven. In them, he claims that the goal of a scene is to communicate a conflict, establish the players on either side, what their values are, followed by an emphatic climax of words that reveal more about our characters. And this scene with the Joker and Batman delivers upon that in spades. The interaction starts off like any good film would, with a bang. Batman appears suddenly behind the Joker, antagonizing him physically. This has been a standard approach he's taken when dealing with all criminals to tremendous effect across the board, to leverage his intimidation when interacting with the unpredictable. But instead, Joker shrugs this all off, and in the same demeanor he was chit-chatting with Gordon moments prior, continues to minimize Batman's presence, until Batman reveals that he truly doesn't understand the Joker at all.
Then why do you want to kill me?
From this point on, Joker has become the one with the answers, as Batman assumes his position on the rhetorical back foot. The Joker claiming that Batman isn't like those, quote, normal people he wishfully claims to be like.
Don't talk like one of them. You're not. Even if you'd like to be. To them, you're just a freak.
This is a curious choice of words. You might remember that at numerous times in this film, Joker has taken specific issue with those in his company that refer to him as, quote, a freak or crazy. And this very aspect of his persona, this perspective speaks to the foundation of why he finds Batman so interesting and why he ultimately carries out what he does in the 3rd act of this film. He doesn't see himself as freakish or crazy in the slightest, but instead as someone that operates in a crazy world as one ought to, citing that there is a thin line between civilized people and utter chaos.
See, I'm not a monster. I'm just ahead of the curve.
And to that, Batman either sees that this is a pointless conversation or one he has no argument against. Either way, Batman has lost the rhetorical battle in this ideological skirmish and has now resorted once again to physical altercation. And once again, this doesn't work. And what's more, it's egging the Joker on.
So you're gonna have to play my little game if you want to save one of them.
This is the moment the ball drops and Batman realizes that not only was he never in control of this situation, but instead has played right into Joker's hands. And for a split second, Batman's facade breaks, uttering out of concern and confusion the word, them? Joker realizes this and instead of answering his question, decides to use his brand of mental warfare to terrific success against Batman. Bruce is no longer in control. He's seeing red and continues to dance to the Joker's song.
Your friend, the district attorney, or his blushing bride to be.
This is an immeasurably fascinating performance with layers of complexity delivered by Heath Ledger in this scene. We have the mind games, the anarchy, the twisted personality of the Joker shining through, as well as his clear enjoyment of the beating he's receiving, with each punch feeling more and more validated. When it comes to actors, there are elements to each performance that makes them unique, and one aspect of Heath's I was surprised to find came from a quote courtesy of Christian Bale himself. He said, "Our first scene was in an interrogation room together, and I saw that he was a hell of an actor who's completely committed to it and totally gets the tone that Chris is trying to create with this." As you see in this movie, Batman starts beating the Joker and realizes that this is not your ordinary foe, because the more I beat him, the more he enjoys it, the more I'm giving him satisfaction. Heath was behaving in a very similar fashion too. He was kinda egging me on. I was saying, you know what, I really don't need to actually hit you. It's going to look just as good if I don't. And he's going, go on, go on, go on. He was slamming himself around, and there were tiled walls inside of that set which were cracked and dented from him hurling himself onto them. His commitment was total. These punches that Christian Bale, that Batman throws at Joker, were real, which I think makes this quote all the more powerful. And he's right. Batman has no leverage in this situation. Joker doesn't value what he's normally able to take advantage of with regular criminals, dangling them from buildings and such. This is a man who doesn't fear death, but in fact yearns for Batman to kill him, because then his ideology would be proven correct in his eyes and Batman's. Echoing the sentiment Alfred laid at Bruce's feet towards the beginning of this film, some men aren't looking for anything logical like money. They can't be bought, bullied, reasoned, or negotiated with. Some men just want to watch the world burn. And if that line wasn't enough, the scene ends with Joker giving Batman everything he wanted, meaning that all of this pageantry was for his own personal enjoyment. And okay, well, he almost gave him everything he wanted. Leveraging his emotional outburst, Joker takes advantage one last time, giving the correct coordinates but switching the locations of each person, ensuring that whomever Batman valued more would likely die. It's an outstandingly fiendish plan, the likes of which I still think about to this day. There are scenes in cinema that go down in history as some of the best, and this is deservedly one of them. Two characters verbally wrestle, with one coming out the top in emphatic and catastrophic fashion, taking not only the police and Batman off guard in the process, but us too, as an audience.
No! No! No!
It's alright, listen.
For me, this is the highlight of the film and the most emphatic manipulation in the film from the Joker, which sets up the final gambit.
Introduce a little anarchy.
The final act itself explores the downward spiral of Harvey Dent, again loosely similar to the Long Halloween comic itself, though it again does have fundamental differences. The final massive set piece with the two boats is a powerful one that speaks to the resolve and unwillingness in people to kill their fellow man, no matter their bias. And in a sequence with virtually no action at all, Gotham City proved themselves to the Joker he predicted wrong. He thought that they and everyone was like him, but they were not. He is a freak. He is alone. However, the state of Harvey now following the collapse of his worldview is a sobering wake-up call to Bruce that he needs to remain in Gotham as the Batman. For him to live long enough to see himself become a villain, to be everything Gotham needs him to be. Not to be a hero, but a silent guardian, a watchful protector. Gotham's White Knight and Harvey Dent may have fallen, but its Dark Knight will always remain to do what must be done. Overall, the film is spectacular from start to finish with some of the best scenes I've ever witnessed. The interrogation scene again is my favorite, with just two people talking. Now seeing it through the eyes of someone that understands these characters a little better than I previously had, I can say that I loved it even more. Harvey Dent is virtuous, Alfred is brilliant, Lucius is awesome, and the Joker is captured perfectly thanks to the late great Heath Ledger and the wonderful writing team behind this film. This is a trend-setting and standard-bearer. My final rating for The Dark Knight is 9.5 out of 10. Next up, to cap this trilogy off, 2012's The Dark Knight Rises. I was extremely excited to see this movie, and it didn't disappoint. If I was to describe this film in one word, it would be conclusive. And while it does have its weaker points like its action, I genuinely think that from a story perspective, this was a perfect end to this trilogy of films. I like that this story is taking almost the exact opposite approach of The Dark Knight, where Batman was looking for a way to commit himself to a life with Rachel and to leave the work he believes in to Harvey Dent. This film, however, explores the depression and loss Bruce finds himself in now that he doesn't see a future as Bruce Wayne, yearning for a moment of respite where he can assume his alter ego to pretend and live in a fantasy where he can. Despite his health, despite the logical decision being to take a different approach, this leads to those closest to him that remain, like Alfred, to step away from him as they can't watch him march down this path of self-destruction any longer. Following the events of The Dark Knight, Bruce is listless, unable to move on, crippled and injured from the years of wear and tear in his body, his interpersonal relationships withering, his social life non-existent, and his business on the verge of bankruptcy. A company responsible for contributing large sums of money towards the various charities of the area, something his father very much believed in deeply. And because of his declining mental health, because of his fixation on what was instead of what could be, he hurts those around him, including himself. Now, on the topic of charity and dwindling wealth, the themes of money, greed, poverty, and revolution are very much a driving force, particularly with the film's secondary characters and main villain. The wonderful Selina Kyle makes her Nolan debut here in this picture, and I love Anne Hathaway's portrayal of the character. The focus isn't on her sexual awakening like Catwoman 2004, but it's instead concentrating on her position in the world and the moral code she has. The perspective she possesses speak a lot to the themes of inequality in the city of Gotham and the world at large. Her seeing Bruce Wayne as fair game to steal from, as he has the means to support himself regardless. She's a criminal, yes, but she is principled. The same can be said for Bane. Now, we don't get to see much of him outside of the first half of the film, but we do feel his presence. While not being the hulking, mindless, gross mess we saw in the late 90s interpretation of the character, if you could even call it that, in this he proves to us why he's one of Batman's most terrifying villains. Following films like The Dark Knight, which had Heath Ledger's career-defining performance in The Joker, a lesser director might have looked to recapture that same lightning in a bottle by trying to recreate the magic with a different character or actor. No such choice happens here, thankfully. The Dark Knight Rises feels very much like a labor of love with a particular fondness for the various idiosyncrasies that make Bane such an interesting character. There is a Batman comic series called Nightfall produced during the early 90s, and for the most part this is the de facto Bane story that put him on the map as one of the most intimidating and terrifying enemies of the Dark Knight, all the while managing to tell a grounded story about Batman, particularly his psychology in relation to Bane's. And is not only widely praised and acclaimed, but for the purposes of this video, it served as the basis or inspiration for part of this very movie we're discussing today, The Dark Knight Rises. Unfortunately, I didn't have time to read this story. What can I say? I had a lot to read and watch, and it was way too long to even attempt. I mean, there's a reason I'm covering the DC Universe stuff in another video next week. I just didn't have the time. But with that said, I did need to find out who Bane was, so I asked AJ for help once again.
Hello there.
He told me to read Vengeance of Bane, a significantly shorter story released also in the early 90s covering the origins of the character. From a faithfulness standpoint, much like the Joker, while elements of his origin could be taken from this comic, such as the dungeon where we see that he's from, I thought what this film nailed perfectly was the spirit of the character as a whole.
You merely adopted the dark. I was born in it.
From this point on, the movie is all go, go, go. Any setup that was previously required is now replaced with some of my favorite scenes across all of these films. Alfred's coming to terms with Bruce's more self-destructive tendencies was heartbreaking. Bruce's refusal to leave with Miranda to go far away from Gotham spoke to that destructive inclination he still has, and Bane's first encounter with the Batman is something I don't think I will ever forget. The quote, "Peace has cost you your strength, victory has defeated you," from Bane again speaks to the issues Bruce is willfully ignoring in lieu of continuing his work blindly as Batman. And in the presence of Bane, unlike anything else we've seen, save for perhaps the Joker in the prior film, nothing phases him, and what's more is he knows who Batman is, unlike the Joker. There's this strange effect on Bane's voice, and to be honest, it took a long while for me to get used to it fully. Initially it sounded silly, but the more I heard it, the more invasive it sounded. I don't know if this was a conscious choice made by the audio mixing team, but Bane's voice always sounded like it was eerily close to me, like it cut through every scene's atmosphere. The action in this film, on the other hand, isn't good at all, and I'll say that here to avoid having to address it later. The way it's shot feels almost amateur compared to the rest of the film, not helped at all by the choreography, which feels more like a bad Power Rangers episode rather than a summer blockbuster of this caliber. However, and this is a big however, the first fight against Bane is helped a lot, I think, by this very weird action, and I'll explain why. Batman appears weak and pathetic against Bane, who barely tries. There's no pageantry, there's no illusion of intimidation. The camera work is intentionally flaccid, with Bane's men watching this unravel before their eyes, Catwoman included. His suit clearly visible, cape soaked, weighing him down. This all serves one purpose: to make Batman appear pathetic, totally outmatched and unprepared. And it works. Alfred was right. Now it's time to rebuild, and once again we get another great sequence of scenes as Bane brings the city of Gotham to its knees without anyone to stand in his way, and we get Bruce Wayne, a beaten man clinging to life, learning how to walk again, forgotten at the bottom of a dungeon in a well, unable to escape. Well, that is until he does. Rise of the Dark Knight. There's an important change that happens with Bruce Wayne in this sequence. Batman now is fighting to live instead of waiting to die. What I love about this story is that it truly feels like one long continuous narrative across all three films. The reincorporation of characters like Ra's al Ghul, coupled with the training he needs to undertake in order to lift himself from this literal and metaphorical pit of despair, harkens back to the days of Batman Begins. In other words, this truly feels like a complete series with a singular, uncompromising vision. It's spectacular. However, I can't help but feel a powerful sense of what could have been. This film is a powerful reflection on the past. Characters like Scarecrow reclaim roles with new positions of power, and they are massively entertaining. Having discovered through my research for this video that Heath had planned on performing in this film also makes me wonder in what capacity would the Joker have been involved in the final product. A character the likes of which is obsessed with anarchy and chaos would have been an ideal candidate for the world like this. And so, nostalgically, I do look back with sadness, but as soon as I do, this film utilizes nostalgia in a positive way that too serves the story. The resurgence of quotes like, "Bruce, why do we fall?" haunting his dreams as he fails to scale out of this pit to rescue the people he swore to protect serves to create a sense of occasion and purpose the likes of which a single movie cannot on its own accomplish. With the final climbing attempt out of this pit possessing a powerful philosophy the likes of which I wasn't expecting, though it is perfect for this occasion. For months as Bruce has agonized in this dungeon, he's heard the tale of a child that has managed to drag himself out of the darkness. A feat no ordinary child, or adult for that matter, could perform. A child forged from suffering and pain, who we learned climbed that wall without the use of a rope. The interesting part of this film isn't necessarily how weak Bruce appeared or how he ultimately builds himself back up from that, but how Bane thoroughly broke his spirit as well as his back. This film explores what it means to fight fully with mind, body, and spirit, and questions what spirit in combat means and how one could expect to fight with full spirit if they do not fear death. How can they run faster, fight longer than possible? How can they expect to try harder than someone that is scared to die? Which, honestly, is an interesting concept, but when the solution to this problem was proposed, I myself got scared. You see, over Christmas, I watched a film called Free Solo, and as the name suggests, it follows one man by the name of Alex Honnold climbing a cliff face called El Capitan in the Yosemite National Park in California, without a rope, harness, or anything. And one thing this film does a great job of is granting you a perspective on how one might feel while undertaking such a challenge, which honestly helped me immensely in understanding exactly the impulse and mindset Bruce was trying to achieve here. I really like also that upon his return, he announces his presence to the city not with the bat signal, but with a bright fiery symbol scorched onto the bridge, piercing through the darkness of the night. This idea of Batman as a symbol for the city of Gotham is something I truly appreciated while watching these films back to back. This symbol plays a role in every film, whether it be him establishing it in the first one, his reinforcing that ideal in The Dark Knight, or right now with him standing by those same virtues to the bitter end in The Dark Knight Rises. It acts as a powerful through line with all of these films that in the moment brought a tear to my eye. The utter desperation these cops must have been feeling, their friends and families terrorized or worse, and now with only hours standing between them and certain death, they stand before Bane's army shaking with fear in their eyes. Seeing Batman revitalize their morale with his presence is exactly what I came to this movie for, and boy does it deliver. The ending. I'm not gonna lie. Having been so caught up in the moment of Bruce fighting one-on-one against Bane in the rematch to end all rematches, when Miranda stabbed him in the back and announced that she was the one who escaped, the daughter of Ra's al Ghul, I lost my collective shit. A planned 3 movies in the making. A plan to destroy Gotham completely, finally realizing her father's mission. And I love that. Joker or no Joker, this is a top-class film that is so damn entertaining from start to finish. The switcheroo with the main villain and her backstory, the reveal of Robin, who is brilliant in the movie by the way, Gordon and Batman sharing a super personal moment together, and the final carrying away of the bomb to a safe distance. There's a wonderful yet haunting sense of foreboding finality to this ending. And furthermore, I don't think I felt a more sorrowful scene consisting of just one man's reaction than I did with Alfred's breakdown in front of the 3 headstones of the Wayne family, apologizing profusely to Tom and Martha for not being enough to save their little boy. And I'm not afraid to admit it, this really got me good. I'm not sure what the feelings surrounding this film's ending are, but for me, this was as close to a perfect ending for this trilogy that I could imagine. I have quite literally no issues narratively, and what's more is that the surprises it's filled with were not only previously established, but they feed into the motivations and themes of these films perfectly. I cannot describe to you the whirlwind of emotions I felt as it was explained that an autopilot system had been installed into the Batcraft. Or, geez, when Alfred sat down in that restaurant. A scene established at the beginning of this film, perfectly in line with the mechanics of what was established with the clean slate tool provided to Selina, the motivation of Batman to finally move on to bigger and better things in life, and of course, Alfred, finally getting closure for his perceived failings in raising his dear friend's only child, Bruce Wayne. It's a powerful ending full of catharsis, and I for one am over the moon that this is where Christian Bale's Batman was finally laid to rest. At no point did this film trilogy ease up or rest on its laurels. At no point did it coast or rely on the brand of Batman to carry it forth onto the global zeitgeist. This trilogy is a work of art produced by a team of visionaries that understood the characters on an intimate level. A level I felt that only now, having delved into the comics as deep as I have, could fully appreciate. This will not be the last time I see these films, and to anyone out there who hasn't revisited these films or has seen them at all, please go fix that as soon as you can. This is my favorite story of the trilogy and of any Batman film I've seen over this long journey. And while the action in this movie leaves a lot to be desired and its antagonists weren't as iconic as Heath Ledger's Joker, I am still willing to give this film a 9.5 out of 10. It's just that damn good. Next week, I'll be tackling my final Batman video where I review the DC Universe films with Batman, and I will finally watch the new Batman movie starring Robert Pattinson. But until then, I've been totally not Mark. I'll see you all next weekend. Thank you all so much for watching. Phew, now that was a big video.
For you.
There it is! There it is!